In Revelation 4, there is a very special scripture. It's one that is familiar to us, I think. I've read it many times, but I don't know that I had ever really worked my way through it until I did the broadcast series on Revelation. And even subsequent to that broadcast series, there have been some things in this passage that just really strike me. I might say that I'm jealous of John for what he was able to see and do, but John was in the Isle of Patmos because of his service of God. He was in exile. It was a prison colony for political prisoners. And while he was there, he fell into vision and was carried into the day of the Lord and saw all sorts of things. He received visions that, are so astonishing when we read about them and so frightening in some cases that we may not much like to get our nose into the book of Revelation because of the frightening aspects of some of the things that John saw and wrote down for us to see. But after he had gotten these 7 letters to the 7 churches of Asia and had written all of them down, we come to this fascinating chapter 4 of Revelation where he says, "After this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in the sky. And the first voice I heard earlier, the one that was like a trumpet, said to me, 'Come up here. I want to show you some things that will be hereafter.' Immediately," he said, "I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat upon the throne." Now he has been caught up to a door in the sky, stepped through it like a stargate, as it were, and suddenly found himself in an open area. There was a sea of glass underneath everything, and out in the middle of all this there was a singular throne set. There was one sitting upon that throne that he saw there. And he said, "He that sat was looked upon like a jasper and a sardine stone. There was a rainbow." Now, the Greek word is iris, like the iris of your eye, but probably to translate it properly into English so that you conjure up the right image. He'd say, "I saw the throne, and there was a halo all around the throne that was greenish in color. It was like an emerald." If you have an emerald ring, hold it up to the light, and you get a little bit of a feeling of what this might have looked like to John as he stepped into the place. And round about the throne were 24 seats, and upon 24 seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment, and they had on their head crowns of gold. And out of the throne proceeded lightnings and thunderings and voices. What place to be. Steven Spielberg should get a hold of this and do a visual image of what it was like to try to help someone understand, what might the throne of God be like, although it will be a pale imitation, I'm sure. But there were lightnings and thunderings and voices, probably communication going on continually at the throne of God. There were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. We are accustomed to think of the Holy Spirit. Now we are introduced to the idea that there are 7 spirits that are represented not as persons like the 24 elders are, but as burning lamps like fire. And it calls to mind the image of the disciples on the day of Pentecost in their place, and fire coming through the ceiling and distributing out and sitting upon each one of them. We're guessing a lot about so many of the things about God, but there are these little points from time to time that allow us a glimpse, just a glimpse. Someone like John is caught up there and allowed in a vision. Now, if you wonder how could he look on God and live, he was in vision. He was not physically present. He could not come physically present into the presence of God. But in vision, he could see a manifestation of God in this way. There are some really staggering implications in this passage about God, about his throne, and about what goes on there. I must confess that I am absolutely fascinated with the 24 elders of God's throne. Who are they? What kind of beings are they? How do they get there? What is their role? What do they do? Are these just sort of automatons that whenever somebody flips a switch, they all jump up and praise God and throw their crowns down? It doesn't really quite seem like what it would be. Because they are called elders, I draw certain assumptions from that. One of the assumptions I draw from it is that they are not eternal. They are not described in terms of being eternal. They are called elders. Elder implies age. Age implies a point of beginning that has gone on for a long time, mind you. but at a point of beginning. So I would assume they were created beings. They came into existence at some point of time, and at that time was really quite a long time ago. Now we're at a disadvantage in a way here because the term is not explained. Elder isn't. And there are, a number of possible ways of looking at it, but because it is not explained, I think it may be that we are expected to understand it without explanation. In other words, we are assumed to know what an elder is by this. Now, bear in mind that the New Testament aspect of elder had been developing over some period of time, but the New Testament concept of elder has simply grown out of the Old Testament concept of elder. And it was a similar type of office to the church that the elders had been of old. Now, there's a passage back in Numbers 11, and verse 16 is the one verse I'm going to read to you there. But to set the stage on this, many people have looked back in time and have studied the governance in the Old Testament, and they remember where Jethro came to Moses and said, now, you're wearing yourself out serving these people. You need to set up a situation where you've got captains of 50, captains of 100, captains of 1,000, and that you get this pyramid structure set up so that you can govern these people. And Moses did that early on. However, here is a later period of time, and mind you, that while God allowed and accepted that particular form of government, it was no problem in that to a point. That when the time came that Moses complained directly to God and God gave him a solution to his problem, this is the solution that God gave him in Numbers 11. The Lord said to Moses in verse 16, gather unto me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people, and officers over them, and bring them unto the tabernacle of the congregation, that they may stand there with you. This was not a God-created office, folks. It wasn't. It was a tribal office. And the people either were there by right of inheritance because they grew up and they were old and had been in the family and they were the oldest members or the leading members or what have you, or they were elected to the offices they were held, or they held those offices at the sufferance of the people of their tribes. So 70 men were to be selected by whom? Moses. On what basis? On what he knew about these men. They were already elders when he selected them. They were, in effect, probably by modern terminology, princes of tribes. If they were Arabic nomads, they'd be sheiks, the ones who led families, as it were. They were actually heads of large extended families in those days. We know that in synagogues, at times, they elected their elders in those places. Now, these 7 were selected from a list of elders, 70 of them were, and they were brought into the tabernacle of the congregation to stand with Moses there. Now, I'm not going to take the time to work my way through this lesson. I'll let you study it on your own because it's really very straightforward. But upon these 70, once selected, God poured out his Spirit, and the comparison of what happened with those 70 men and what happened on the Feast of Pentecost in 31 AD when the Holy Spirit fell upon the church is rather interesting, as a matter of fact. There were 120 of them present that day in the room whenever the Holy Spirit descended upon them all. And on this occasion, there were the 70. I say 69 because one of them hadn't gotten up there. The Spirit fell on him in the camp. So that even though he had been selected and didn't make it up to the place where he was supposed to be, the Spirit of God still fell upon him because he had been selected. Now, with this historical background, elders, and realizing what they were, and then looking at these 24 elders that are around the throne of God, the Hebrew word, by the way, for these elders that Moses selected is a corresponding word to the Greek word presbyteros, from which we get the word presbyter, from which we get the translation elder in the New Testament. So it's the same basic idea in the two cultures of the elder of the church. And of course, the church actually had its beginning as synagogues. They were Christian synagogues as opposed to being Jewish synagogues, but that was the pattern under which they developed. Now, they form kind of a council around the throne of God. There is really a very impressive administration surrounding the throne of God when you begin to think about it, because you have angels coming and going. You have these messengers with all kinds of things to do and instructions to carry out, places to go and things to do and people to see, as it were, who are coming and going from the throne of God. You have the lightnings and thunderings and voices that are rolling around that place, and I imagine most of the coming and going happens so fast it is like lightning. For the whole communication of an angel arriving, getting his instructions, and leaving the throne of God probably takes place in one pulse beat for you and I of time. time is just not the same for them. And so if you can kind of visualize as best you can something like this going on, you begin to realize that there is an ongoing, active, vigorous administration. Now, I think what are presented here to you as angels, the word angel and what you see in artwork as angels is essentially a Greek idea. It comes from Greek mythology. I was startled on television just a few nights ago to see some bas-reliefs from Greece, and they were pre-Christian. And they showed in Greek mythology angels, which were little winged creatures with wings on the back of them, and men with wings, just exactly like what you see in Christian art, and not at all like what you see described in the Bible. Now, both the Hebrew word and the Greek word, Hebrew word I think is malach, the Greek word angelos, from which we get our word angel, they mean and should be translated as messenger. You'd be a whole lot better off everywhere either one of those words are found in the Bible if the word messenger was used, because you would be far less likely to misunderstand or to stumble over some of the things that you might otherwise stumble over. Some of them actually function like a messenger boy, as it were. In the Old Testament, some of them really would be better described as deputies or ambassadors. That in fact, the Old Testament word malach probably is very close to the New Testament word apostle, as far as the authority, the strength, the idea of what they were actually doing. They were God's apostle to go do this, an apostle to go do that, a deputy, as it were, a little bit more than a messenger in their cases. Now, in the Old Testament, as I say, there are two classes of these beings. There are the messengers and there are the deputies, who are a little stronger. There's one who is called, in your translation probably, the angel of Jehovah. And this one speaks in the first person for God, and obviously has a great deal more authority than any angel ever would have. He actually receives obeisance from the people. There's worship from the people he encounters. In the New Testament, we find a regular old garden variety angel refusing to accept worship from anybody. So you realize the differences that exist in these. Now, this structured administration that you see in heaven, as it were, is very impressive, and it's so impressive that we are tempted, I think, sometimes to emulate that idea here on earth. And yet, though God may occasionally speak to us through an angel or a messenger or a deputy, have you ever realized that we are not permitted to relate to those messengers and those deputies? We'll talk to them. They talk to us. Now, we may ask a question, as some of the Old Testament characters do. What do you mean? Or how about this or that? But as far that they are not allowed to relate to them, and under no circumstances do they ever get to pray to them. You remember when the disciples came to Jesus and said, Lord, teach us to pray? Do you remember what he said? He said, after this manner, therefore, pray you. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. He gives us no example and no instructions that we are to address him, that we must go through him to the Father. In fact, he is very explicit toward the end that they were not to do that. They would go directly to the Father in his name. In other words, it's you and me, Lord, going to the Father, not me going to the Lord and saying, Lord, I'm afraid to speak to the Father. You speak to the Father for me. We think maybe we at times think we'd like to do. But the fact is, there is no need for that. We're told to speak directly to the Father, to address him as our Father, to pray to him as our Father, to ask him what we want in the name of and by the authority of Jesus Christ, which is a different thing entirely from addressing Jesus himself, right? We should understand that very clearly. And certainly, we're not supposed to be praying to angels, some other third party, or some theoretical or perceived priest that we go to in heaven, who then goes to God, or who then goes to Jesus, who goes to God, and keeps removing us step by step away from God. Now, there is in management theory an idea called span of control. And the idea is this, that if we put together an organizational structure and you want to put a man over an area of responsibility, you take a look at the area of responsibility and you count off the number of people who will be reporting to him. And it will vary from manager to manager depending upon their skills, depending upon the kind of job it is, and depending upon what they're trying to get done. But we will have a span of control, that is, a number of things that we can cover with our fingers, as it were. We can span it, we can keep track of it, we can stay on top of it, we can keep it rolling. It's easy to understand. Create a situation where you have more people reporting to you than your span of control will handle, and you're going to go into chaos. And your job will degenerate into confusion. So management theory says don't get it out beyond the span of control. Well, God has no maximum span of control. It's not an issue with Him. So therefore, there's no limit to Him, and we can go to Him anytime. Now, have you ever wondered how your prayers actually come before God? How do they actually get to His ear? How are they heard by Him? Because one would think that you're at your house praying tonight, and I'm at my house praying tonight, and both of us happen to kneel right at 10 o'clock by our beds, and we start talking to God at the same time. I can assure you that somebody's talking to God at the same time you are. Does He hear us both? Is it noise? I've been to some prayer meetings in my time where everybody kneels around their chairs and they all pray out loud at the same time. And you sit there and you listen and you wonder who's praying the loudest, who's the most fervent, which one of these people, how does God sort all this out? Well, I have no trouble imagining that God can sort all of it out. My question was not so much that, but my question, how do your prayers come before God? Now, turn back to Revelation 8. I want to show you an interesting little thing here and give you something to think about this place where we are. We have stepped into the throne room of the universe, the core, the middle, the center, where everything that's going to happen happens and originates and is controlled. It says in verse 8, when He had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And all the seven angels which stood before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. Another angel came, and he stood at the altar having a golden censer, and there was given to him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. Now, if you can just visualize this, an angel almost serving in a priestly capacity in this way, it would seem this messenger, this deputy, this person, comes in with a golden censer, with incense, and he offers this on a brazen altar here with the prayers of the saints, and this smoke, which symbolizes of the incense, symbolizes the prayers of the saints, and it fills the whole area around God with scent, with the smell. That actually, in a way, God is able to smell your prayers. We think of the five senses. Think about it. We think with five senses. I can touch something. I can hear something. I can smell it. I can taste it. I can see it. And so we would think, I offer up a prayer that's verbal. You would hear it if I spoke it before you in your ear, so I assume God's going to hear it. Well, I suppose so. The prayer, the imagery of the prayer, the way it's presented to us is, it comes in here like the smoke from incense and creates a sweet or a pleasant or an aroma that the whole throne room of God is filled with the aroma, which actually constitutes the prayers of the saints. Kind of a fascinating thing. Then he says, the angel took the censer and filled it with the fire of the altar and cast it to the earth, and there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the seven angels, which had the seven last trumpets prepared to sound. We're going into a very sobering picture. Now, it's really an incredible picture when you think about it. Prayers can all come before God at once, and can all have a cumulative effect. They fill the air around and about God's throne like incense, like a sweet smell in His presence. They should be, yes, they are, and they certainly should be, a sweet smell in His presence. And the lessons from this, that be drawn from this, are really staggering to think about. It suggests, for example, that when we don't pray, our absence is sensed. That there is a particular scent, there is a particular savor that I could separate from all this and know, but it's not here. Now, that probably seems strange to you. It would not seem at all strange to your dog. I forget, was it 3,000 times or 6,000 times more sensitive than our smell is, the dog's sense of smell is? Seems like it's 6,000 times more sensitive than ours. I don't think that means the smells are stronger coming to them. I mean that their ability to distinguish between these smells is really almost unbelievable. Of the things that they can discern out of an air that you smell it and it just smells terrible. They smell it, and the whole great group of information that comes into their mind as a result of what they smell there. God made them, by the way, and one can presume that He is able to make distinctions in the scent of our prayers, using this imagery, I'm sure, because I expect the reality of all this goes way beyond anything you and I can grasp. So let's just grasp it like it's presented to us and try to understand God in this way. So it suggests that when we don't pray, our absence is missed. Results of casting the censer to the earth suggest that there's a time when all these prayers come together and create an effect. And that until the time is here, the prayer may seem to be having no effect. But that there comes a moment in time when the cumulative effect of these prayers being offered on the altar, then the coals are taken and cast to the earth and things begin to take place. It also suggests to me, and I want you to think about this, that when we pray, we can be like, say, cheap perfume. When we pray, we can be like a whiff that passes so quickly, it was there, but what was it? I'm not sure what that smell was. I can't place it. It went by so fast, and it's gone, and I'll never get it back again. It suggests something else to me that I hadn't thought about quite in this way before. That if you bring dung before God and burn it on the altar of incense, you are going to stink up the whole place. You ought to think about that sometime. When you go before God to pray, and it calls to mind that fascinating illustration that Jesus gave, when you come to present your offering before God and you remember there that you've got something against your brother, go reconcile that and then come back and offer your gift. Don't just stink up the place with your attitude and with your prayers. You go back in the Psalms, and you'll find a lot of prayers where David, I think, probably stunk up the place when he came before God with prayer. He was honest, and I think those prayers are there because they are the prayers of an honest man. But it's also interesting to note how often he works his way around in the prayer to a sweet savor, and how he has to work that attitude out of himself. And sometimes you can't just get rid of that attitude or wish it to go away. It's there, and you have to deal with it. But I really think we ought to think sometimes about the things that we bring before God, things that we really should dismiss, things we really should ignore, things we should have nothing to do with, and yet here we are dragging this dead cat before God that's got flies and so forth all over it, and a terrible scent all over it, and we're going to offer that or burn that on the altar of God. I don't know what yours is. I know what mine have been, and I really know that there are things that when I go to God, I don't want to be a cheap perfume. I really don't want to be just something that's a whiff. What was that? Well, it was Ron asking the blessing over supper. And that's all there is to it. That I am missed when my peculiar savor is not in the presence of God and known to be there. The related scriptures are many to this idea, and the analogies are endless, and I'm going to leave it up to your own imagination for you when you go to God in prayer to consider what kind of incense you bring, and what you're placing on the altar, and what the results of it are before God's throne. I'm going to leave it up to your own imagination to think in terms of how you want to be represented there, and whether you want to be represented there, and whether you want to be gone from that place for very long, that God would not think about you and realize that you are here and that your prayers are heard. Now this goes on and says, before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal, and in the midst of the throne and round about the throne were four creatures full of eyes before and behind. And the first creature was like a lion, the second creature like a calf, the third beast or creature had a face as a man, and the fourth creature was like a flying eagle. The four creatures had each of them 6 wings about him, and they were full of eyes within, and they rest not day and night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. What a song this quartet sang. And when those creatures gave glory and honor and thanks to him that sat on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him that sat on the throne, and they worship him that lives forever and ever, and they cast their crowns before the throne, saying, You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for you have created all things, and for your pleasure they were created. Now, what a message and what a song the 24 elders sing before God after having heard Holy, Holy, Holy in a version which I think probably will make ours sound like a bee buzzing around in a bottle. The use of the term suggests again to me some things that I've already mentioned. One is they are not eternal, and secondly, that they are members of a larger class of people. In other words, an elder in ancient Israel was a member of a tribe. He was a Jew, he was Issachar, he was of Zebulun, he was of that group. Not only that, the elders that were selected, the 70 elders that were selected, were representatives of a class of elder, which was a class of people, a group of people, a set, as it were. The fact that they had crowns suggests that they had some power and that they had governorship of one sort or another. But look what happens when this quartet sings, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come. These elders, as one man, rise up from their chairs, cast down their thrones, fall on their faces in front of him that sits on the throne, and sing this song of their own that says, You are worthy, O Lord. And that's one of the popular songs you'll hear a lot on religious stations nowadays. Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive honor and glory and blessing. It's in Handel's Messiah, and one of the greatest pieces of music I have ever heard in my life. And all of it, I'm still, comes very short of what was happening here. Now, whatever or whoever these elders are, there are 24 distinct persons. They are as distinct from one another as you here sitting in this room are distinct from one another. There are 24 minds in the room. Now, I want you to think about something. I want you to put your mind at the throne of God, as it were, looking around at a semicircle here of 24 elders, and I want to focus on the third elder from the end of the line on the right. The 21st elder. Just think for a moment about the fact that there was one elder in the seat. He was 21st, if you count him around this way, 3 back from that end of the line, who sat there, who had eyes, who had ears, and who could sense what was happening at the throne of God, and who himself was, how old do you suppose he was by the time this vision was given to John? 15 billion years? Maybe 10. Maybe 5. I wonder how old you have to be to qualify as an elder in that group of 24 that were there. It suggests also that they were older than other beings of the same class. It suggests that didn't all come into existence at the same time. Now, I know I'm making assumptions here, but they seem to be assumptions that are allowed by the context of what we're reading and the way that it is presented to us. And I think there are some things for us to think about in this passage. Now, how old is this elder is one question. The next question is, what goes through his mind when he hears this song? Now, this isn't something that happens every 15 minutes all day, like a show you see in a museum. This is something that gets provoked. Something prompts it. Something happens to cause these living creatures to say, Holy, 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 and sing their song. And when that happens, and when the whole thing comes together, here you sit in your chair. Something has happened that has caused these four creatures in their quartet sing the Holy, Holy, Holy song, and the same thing that is taken touches you in such a way that you rise from your chair, throw your crown on the ground, and prostrate yourself before God and say, You are worthy to receive honor and power, for you have created all things. Is it automatic? Is it something that God gets a little bored and presses a button, and the quartet sings, and the 24 elders throw their crowns down and fall on their faces and sing this song, and they get up, pick up their crowns, and go back to their seats again? That makes no sense whatsoever. that that should be the case. So, what is it that happens? Is it mandated? Is it a command? Or does it come from the heart? One of 24, and the other 24 at the same time. Does this response come from the heart of someone who really knows what God is really like? Coming from these beings. Now, you got to realize that if you were to be able to be in the presence of one of the 24 elders, you would be overawed. The charisma, the power, the glory of these beings, of who they are and what they are, I think it would send any of us to our knees or to our faces, and we would be overwhelmed by being there, to be in their presence, to talk to them or to hear whatever they've got to say. All right? These individuals, as great as they are overwhelmed themselves by who God is and what He has done and what they have seen of Him. Their feeling at the moment must have been one of that the sight or the event or the circumstances were awesome to them. They were awestruck by what they had seen and heard. There was as a feeling in the breast of the 24 elders and our 21st elder that we're thinking about, so we can get ourselves in focus into one person. Must have been one of complete adoration. He admired the one sitting on that throne, and admiration does not even reach the description of how he felt. That by this time, having experienced the character, qualities, the mind, the intelligence, the purpose, the goal, the singleness of purpose, the love coming out from God and His throne, and the affection that He generates, the sheer affection and love for the Father who sat on the throne, in the breast of each one of those 24 elders must have been an awesome thing in and of itself. The real individuals here, with real power, cast all that power down before God and really don't even much want to talk about it anymore. You know, if you can think about this and consider, how do you suppose they differed from one another? Were they identical? I don't think so. I am able to divine of the knowledge of God and be able to gather of the knowledge of God. There is no way He would put 24 of them out there if they were all alike. One is really quite enough. They're different. They have different contributions to make. They have different tasks to perform. They have different responses to things. That's why He wants them there, obviously. They are different. Now, how important do you suppose the differences between number 21 and number 1 are to them on a day-to-day basis, week to week, hour to hour, job by job? You know, I think you have to realize that when you are in the presence of the one great being above all in the universe, whose character I am utterly unable to describe, whose glory I am hopelessly lost to help to convey to you. But to be in the presence of that one, day in and day out, do you suppose it would tend to make their differences rather insignificant? I should think so. I think that it would make any idea of jealousy. I mean, can jealousy exist in the presence of that consuming fire that sat at the center of that room? I don't think so. Don't think it would really have much meaning to any of them that's there. Anger survive it? What are there to be angry at? You know, John the Baptist faced a really interesting problem. He had never seen these 24 elders up here, had never encountered them or knew what they were, but John the Baptist was a man who had been commissioned by God. He was an important man, charismatic man, powerful man, influential man. And so there were people who came to John asking him various things, and John makes a statement. He says, and I didn't write the chapter down, and so I'll just read it to you, and you can look it up yourself later. He said, I baptize with water. I think it's in the first chapter of John, about verse 26. I baptize with water, but there stands one among you whom you don't know. He it is who coming after me is preferred before me, whose shoes latchet I am not worthy to unloose. I'm not important enough to take off his shoes, folks. Can't take hold of the string and pull it, or take hold of the latchet and undo it of his sandal. I'm just not even worthy for that. These things were done in Bethabara beyond Jordan, where John was baptizing. The next day John saw Jesus coming to him and said, Behold, the Lamb of God that taketh away the sin of the world. This is the one. This is the one. This is the one who had been with the Father from all eternity, and who emptied himself and came down in human flesh, and who was above all, who himself would have been worshipped and honored and glorified, in fact, was glorified and honored by the 24 elders once he became known to them or displayed to them as the Lamb of God in the 5th chapter of Revelation. He actually said, Behold, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. This is he of whom I said, After me comes a man who is preferred before me, because he was before me. I didn't know him, but that he should be made manifest to Israel. That's why I'm here baptizing. And John bare record, saying, I saw the Spirit descending from heaven like a dove, and it abode upon him, and I knew him not. But he that sent me to baptize with water, the same said to me, Upon whom you shall see the Spirit descending and remaining upon him, the same is he that baptizes with the Holy Spirit. And I saw, and I bear record, that this is the Son of God. This is the Son of God, the firstborn of God, the first Son of God, the one who sits at his right hand, for whom all these 24 elders will cast their thrones and prostrate themselves with all the love to him that they had toward the Father. Later, in chapter 3 of John, they came to him in verse 26 and said, Rabbi, he that was with you beyond Jordan, to whom you bear witness, behold, the same baptizes, and all men are coming to him. And John answered and said, A man can receive nothing except it be given to him from above. Think about it. He said, look, everybody's going to him. He's gathering disciples all over the place. It's given to him from above. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, I am sent before him. He that has the bride is the bridegroom, not me. But the friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's joy. This my joy therefore is fulfilled. He must increase, but I must decrease. There have not been very many men in the history of the world who were able to do that. And were able to have that kind of an attitude to say, look, I mean, nothing, whatever's given of this nature, whatever of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, whatever job or task of the Holy Spirit, I saw the Spirit descend upon him like a dove. I mean, nothing like that can be done unless it comes from above. He's going to increase. I must decrease. And he's willing to have it so. He that comes from above is above all. He that is of the earth is earthly and speaks of the earth. He that comes from heaven is above all. He comes from that place which John saw, from the presence of the Father, and from the presence of the 24 elders, all of whom knew him, understood who he was, and what it was that he was going to do. The Apostle Paul had to deal himself with this problem and it's a problem that all of us, who are given a chance to work for God, who have something to do with God, who serve God, who walk with God, in whatever capacity we do, is that there's a temptation that continually comes our way to think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think. We give a prayer before God, and the prayer is answered, and we feel good about ourselves as a result of having our prayer answered. Or we are deathly sick, and we are healed by an absolute divine miracle from God, and no one can gainsay it. And for the rest of our lives, we carry around the temptation to pride as a result of the healing that might have come our way. Or if you are a person who is a gifted speaker or preacher, if you're one who could even walk over and heal sick people. You imagine the challenge to one's ego, the gift of healing would be? To walk into the hospital where a sick child is lying there who's been burned badly in a house fire, reach over and put your hand on the child and have the skin come back whole just like before, and have the child get up out of bed and go running down the hallway. You realize what a challenge to one's ego that would be? Apostle Paul understood that in many, many ways, in many things that he did. In 2 Corinthians, there is this almost, it's kind of an amusing passage that Paul has here about the way he's had to face up to some of these things in his own life and his own ministry and the attitudes that people have. And I couldn't help of thinking of this when I was reading about the 24 elders. Paul, myself, beseech you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who in presence am base among you, in absence I am bold toward you. What do you mean, in presence am base among you? Well, it means basically a lot of them looked down on him when he was there. I beseech you that I may not be bold when I am present with that confidence wherewith I think to be bold against some that think of us as if we walked according to the flesh. If we walk after the flesh, we don't war after the flesh. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, it's not physical, but it's mighty through God to the casting down of strongholds. Then casting down imaginings and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, and having in a readiness to revenge all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. You know, you can get around to really getting even with somebody and revenging the disobedience when your obedience is really straightened out. You look on things, verse 7, after the outward appearance. If a man trust himself that he is Christ, let him think of this again, that as he is Christ, so are we Christ. We all belong to him. You belong to Christ, I belong to Christ, so what's the big deal? For though I should boast somewhat more of our authority, which the Lord has given us, why? For edification, not for destruction, I wouldn't be ashamed, that I may not seem, I don't do it because I don't want to seem to terrify you with letters. For his letters, they are weighty and powerful. But his bodily presence, well, that's weak, and his speech is beneath content. Paul, I gather, was not a good speaker in person. It's hard to believe. I think it's judging by some Greek standards they concluded that. Now it says in verse 12, but we dare not make ourselves of the number, or compare ourselves with some that commend themselves, that they, measuring themselves by themselves, and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. And I thought about that in relation to these 24 elders sitting across here, who could be tempted, if they were not who they are, and where they are, to measure themselves by themselves. In other words, to compare themselves with others of the same kind. And to say, well, I am an elder. I'm not one of the rank and file out here. I am one of the leading elders. I'm not one of the ordinary elders. I am at the throne of God. I'm not just anybody. I'm one of 24. And not only am I one of 24, I'm better than number 22. Now, that's extreme, of course. But at the same time, when you have 24 independent minds here, capacity would be there, but were it not for one thing. They stand in the presence of Almighty God, before whom all our differences become indistinguishable. We stand in His presence, you really can't tell much difference. In righteousness, wisdom, character, you name it, we're all just old flesh and blood human beings, and we don't have much of anything to recommend ourselves toward God. What we might have of service is something He gave us, but that's not the same. But we will not boast ourselves without our measure or line, but according to the measure or line that God has distributed, a line that reaches. What does that mean? What's this line that reaches to you? Well, the word is canon in the Greek, and it means basically a standard, or put it in this terms, a jurisdiction. I'm not going to be arguing with somebody about whether you're in my jurisdiction or whether you're in his jurisdiction. We stretch ourselves beyond our measure as though we didn't reach you people. For we've come to you in preaching the gospel of Christ. We've been right out there. I was the one that brought it to you in the first place. What are we talking about here? And he carries on talking about jurisdictions and having the right to speak to them and saying, I'm hoping to come to you people and beyond your people. What are we talking about jurisdictions for? Somebody had been talking about Paul doesn't have any business over there. That's not in his area. And to keep out. And he was rather amusingly frustrated by the thing. And that the measuring of ourselves by ourselves, measuring ourselves by our own standards, it was silly. Because just because I'm not quite as good as you are, doesn't mean that God will hear your prayer more quickly than He hears mine. For before Him, we are all nothing. We're all sinners. We all belong on our face. We all belong down in the dirt. There's nothing for any of us to boast of before God, is there? And we know all that. I just thought, in a way, taking a look at these 24 arrayed before God, we would suddenly begin to see, hopefully, that when they belong on their face before God, after 10 or 15 billion years of working with God, and they can see no difference between themselves, when they all honor Him, and they realize there is no glory due to anyone but Him, For by him were all things created for his own pleasure. Then surely shouldn't we try to think that way and to present ourselves before God in prayer along those lines? There's a little later in 2 Corinthians another passage that I think is very powerful. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, this: "It is expedient for me to glory. I am going to come to visions and revelations of the Lord. Knew a man in Christ about 14 years ago, whether in the body I can't tell or out of the body I can't tell, God knows." And he's talking about himself. He's looking upon himself as though he were another person. He is saying that it's not the old sinful Paul of the flesh that we're talking about here. It's just a man who was caught up before God. "I knew such a man, whether in the body or out of the body I cannot tell, God knows, how he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words, which it is not lawful for man to utter." You know, some have speculated he might have been talking about John, who heard seven thunders and was not allowed to write them down, but really I think most commentators think Paul is talking about Paul right here because of the way the context develops. So apparently Paul heard the same seven thunders, something like them, and was not allowed to convey that to anyone else. Heard unspeakable things. I don't know how you feel about this. I feel myself that I would not normally be able to keep my vanity or my ego under control if I were admitted into that select group of men who had caught up into paradise and had heard unspeakable words that I couldn't utter to any of you. I don't know what would happen to me. I don't know what would happen to my heart and to my mind and the personal struggles that I would have to go through, and I know that probably you feel much the same way about yourself. Paul says, "I'll glory in that man, but of myself I will not glory, only in my infirmities. For though I would desire to glory, I'm not going to be a fool. I'm going to tell you the truth. And I'm going to forbear from this because I don't want any man to think of me above what he sees me to be or hears me to be." Let's don't get our eyes set too high on any of us. Let's don't make our expectations too high on any human being down here, because we don't measure up to the 24 elders and they wind up on their face. So there's nothing there in any of us. He said then, "I forbear, and lest I should be exalted above measure, through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing I besought the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. He said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For I have concluded from what God says to me," says Paul, "that the glory of Christ could not rest upon me if I did not have these infirmities. If I did not have this weakness to bear, if I did not have this struggle to fight, if I didn't have to make my way through this thing, I could not have the glory and experience the glory of serving Christ in the way that I do. So, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecution, in distresses for Christ's sake." You want to know what his thorn in the flesh was? Listen, here he says, "I am reproached, I have physical infirmities, I'm reproached by others, I'm in need, I have things I need and I don't have. I'm persecuted by people, and I'm in distress, all these things for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, that is when I am really strong." There are some lessons in here that, in this concept that I'm trying to present to you today, that I feel utterly inadequate to convey. The importance of realizing that at our best state, we're altogether vanity. Man, at his best state, is vanity. And all of our efforts and all of our works are nothing. It is the work that God does and allows us to sort of be involved in, or stand and watch, maybe in some cases, that He does, that are the things that are really important to do. I remember an old friend of mine once, he was old at the time, made a statement once. He said, he says, "I know that I'm not doing any of the work for God that is being done." He said, "I know that my strength and the things that I perform really don't amount to a hill of beans. But I'm having to work just as hard as if I was doing it myself. And I thought that that was a pretty good credo for life. That we have got to work just as hard as if we were carrying the burden. If we ever forget that we really are not the ones carrying the burden, we're lost. 24 elders, and number 21 sitting over there, something happened at the throne of God. Something happened within his sight and the sight of the beings sitting to his right and to his left that caused the four creatures to sing their song of Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, and caused every one of them to leap from their seats, cast their thrones before God, and say, we're nothing. Our rulership is nothing. Our power is nothing. What we have done is nothing. And to throw themselves on their faces before God and honor him. I wish somehow that we could find in ourselves the ability, the way to see God as they see him.